You step outside, expecting a quiet morning, but instead, your heart nearly stops. Right there on your porch lies a massive bear, completely still. No movement, no growls, just silence. Is it dead? Is it sleeping? Or is something even more shocking about to happen? What would you do in this situation? It was just another ordinary morning for Joe, a quiet farmer who lived far from the city's chaos. With a steaming cup of coffee in hand, he stepped outside to enjoy the crisp air and peaceful sunrise. But the moment he opened his door, he froze. Right there, stretched across his wooden porch, was a massive bear, motionless, lifeless, not a single breath visible. Joe's heart pounded. Was it dead? Was it just sleeping? Or was it something far more dangerous? Joe stood frozen, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed at him to step back, to get inside, to call for help. But something wasn't right. Taking a slow, cautious breath, he looked closer. That's when he noticed it. The bear's ribs, faintly visible beneath its thick fur. Its breathing was slow, almost labored. The usual strength of a wild bear was nowhere to be seen. This wasn't a predator waiting to pounce. This was something else entirely. The bear was starving. Joe felt a wave of hesitation. A bear was still a bear, unpredictable, dangerous. He knew the safest option was to shut the door and stay away. Or maybe call the authorities, let them handle it. But then, another thought crossed his mind. What if this bear didn't have much time left? What if he was its last chance? Against all logic, against every warning drilled into him about wild animals, Joe made his decision. He stepped back inside, not to hide, but to help, grabbing a loaf of bread, some leftover meat, and a bucket of water. He took a deep breath and walked back outside, straight toward the starving giant. Joe's hands trembled as he placed the food just a few feet away from the bear. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Was this a terrible mistake? Would the bear wake up confused and aggressive? He took slow, cautious steps back, never turning his back on the motionless creature. The silence was unbearable. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Then a flicker of movement. The bear's nose twitched, its large, ragged chest rising and falling with more effort. Its eyes, half open, dull exhausted, slowly shifted toward the food. For a moment, Joe felt a surge of regret. Had he come too close? Had he pushed his luck too far? The bear let out a low, weak grunt. It wasn't the deep, terrifying growl of a healthy predator. It was the sound of something barely holding on. With sluggish, almost painful movements, the bear stretched out its paw, scraping at the porch floor as it struggled to lift its head. It looked at the food, sniffed the air, and then, with the last bit of strength it had, pulled itself closer. Joe watched, his breath shallow, every muscle in his body tense. This was the moment of truth. The bear opened its massive jaws and, with slow, deliberate movements, began eating. Each bite seemed to bring a fraction of life back into its weary body. The crust of the bread disappeared quickly. The leftover meat vanished in seconds. The water, Joe hadn't even realized how desperate the bear was for it, was slurped up with deep, grateful gulps. Minutes passed. The bear ate in silence, its heavy breast the only sound filling the air. Joe remained still, standing by the doorway, watching in awe. He had expected chaos, fear, maybe even a fight for survival. But this was something else. This wasn't a wild beast ravaging a meal. This was a starving soul, clinging to whatever kindness it could find. And then, something incredible happened. The bear, now visibly more alert, turned its head, slowly, deliberately, toward Joe. For a split second, man and beast locked eyes. Joe felt something in that moment. Something he couldn't quite explain. The bear didn't just look at him. It acknowledged him. Not as a threat, not as prey, but as something else. Then, just as quickly as the moment arrived, it passed. The bear, with newfound strength, shifted its weight and let out a deep, heavy exhale. Its massive body relaxed. It wasn't ready to leave just yet, but for the first time since Joe had found it, it no longer looked like death was at its doorstep. Hope, That was the only word Joe could think of. And little did he know, this was just the beginning. The next morning, as the golden sunlight stretched across Joe's quiet farm, he found himself glancing toward the porch, half expecting the bear to be gone. Maybe it had regained enough strength to return to the wilderness. Maybe it was just a fleeting encounter, one of those strange, unexplainable moments in life. But as he stepped outside, his breath caught. There it was. The bear sat near the edge of the porch, no longer sprawled out in exhaustion, but upright, alert, waiting. Joe froze. This was different. The bear had eaten, regained some strength, and yet it was still here, not out of desperation, not out of weakness, but by choice. It should have been terrifying. Every logical part of Joe's mind told him that a wild bear, no matter how weak it once was still a bear, unpredictable, dangerous. But for some reason, he wasn't afraid. Carefully, he walked back inside, grabbed more food, this time some leftover fish, and placed it at a safe distance. He stepped back and watched. The bear ate, just as it had the day before. But there was something different in its movements now. Less desperation, more control, more trust. And then, like clockwork, it came back again the next day. And the day after that. Days turned into weeks, and a strange, silent understanding formed between them. Joe never tried to get too close, and the bear never showed aggression. There were no roars, no warning growls, just quiet acceptance. Joe found himself talking to it sometimes, not expecting a response, of course, but simply filling the silence. "Guess you like fish, huh?" he muttered one evening as the bear finished another meal. The bear simply blinked at him. Joe chuckled. "Yeah, I figured." It became a routine, one that defied everything Joe had ever known about wild animals. Then, one morning, something happened that would stay with Joe forever. As he set the food down, the bear didn't immediately eat. Instead, it did something completely unexpected. It stepped forward. Joe tensed, instinct telling him to back away. But before he could react, the bear, this massive, powerful creature, lifted one of its paws and gently nudged his arm. It wasn't a shove. It wasn't aggression. It was soft, careful, almost deliberate. Joe's breath caught in his throat. Was this gratitude? A sign of trust? A simple acknowledgement? He didn't know. But in that moment, man and beast stood together, bound by something unspoken, something deeper than fear, deeper than instinct, something real. And then one day, the bear was gone. Joe stepped outside that morning, expecting to see the familiar figure waiting near the porch, as it had for weeks. But this time, the space was empty. No heavy breathing. No quiet, watchful eyes. Just silence. At first, he told himself it was normal. The bear had regained its strength. It was a wild animal. After all, it was bound to leave eventually. But as the days passed, an unexpected emptiness settled in Joe's chest. He never tried to tame it, never gave it a name. And yet, its absence felt like losing something he never realized he had. Weeks turned into months, and winter arrived. The mornings were colder now, the ground covered in a thin layer of frost. Joe had almost convinced himself that the entire thing had been a strange, fleeting chapter in his life, until the morning everything changed. It was early, just before sunrise, when Joe stepped onto his porch. His breath came out in soft clouds, the crisp air biting at his skin. But then, something unusual caught his eye. Paw prints, large, unmistakable, pressed lightly into the frost-covered wood. They led up to the very spot where the bear used to sit. Joe's heart pounded as he followed the trail with his eyes, and that's when he saw it. Right there, placed carefully in the center of his porch, was a fish, fresh, untouched. For a long moment, Joe just stared, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. A bear wouldn't just leave food behind, not unless it meant something. He knelt down, running his fingers over the cold scales of the fish, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. Was this a coincidence? A leftover meal dropped by some other animal? Or was it something more? Joe let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. He'd never get an answer, and maybe that was the beauty of it. A wild bear, a creature driven by instinct survival and nature's harsh rules, had come back, left behind a gift and vanished once more. Not out of need, not out of hunger, but maybe, just maybe, to say thank you. Joe sat on his porch that morning, staring at the fish, the paw prints, and the fading trail leading back into the wilderness. He would never know for sure what it meant. Was it just survival instinct? A random coincidence? Or did the bear truly understand kindness? Can wild animals feel gratitude? Can trust form between two beings who were never meant to cross paths? What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your take on this incredible story. And hey, if you love stories that make you question the world around us, make sure to subscribe. There are plenty more to come.